Close your eyes, let the world behind you soften. You are here now, safe, still, and ready to be carried somewhere quiet. Take a breath as deep as a mountain pool, and let us begin. Our story begins in the shadow of Kyoto's eastern wall, where time drifts slowly like incense smoke curling over tatami mats. The year is 1684. The Tokugawa shogunate rules with order and elegance, and within the hush of tradition, a hidden garden sleeps untouched by storm or season. It lies behind the shogun's oldest residence, nestled beneath the stone embankment that guards the capital. There is no entrance from the palace above, no gate, no path. Only a cracked wooden panel behind the oldest tea house, known only to a few. And one of them is Asa. She is quiet, with hands that never rush and eyes that seem always halfway between this world and another. She wears the pale brown robe of a temple assistant, though she does not pray. Her work is not with scrolls or bells, but with moss, bamboo, and the careful raking of gravel. Each morning, she slips through the panel, bowing slightly to the unseen space beyond. The garden welcomes her, always. It is small, barely the size of a courtyard, but it breathes like something alive. Stone lanterns rest where moonlight once fell. 3 stepping stones mark the edge of a coilless pond. A single pine tree bends forward, as if listening. And everywhere, the ground is covered with crushed white gravel raked each day into perfect lines that curl like wind across silk. No one speaks of the garden, not because it is forbidden, but because it is remembered only by those who listen with more than ears. Asa has never spoken to the shogun. She has never seen his face, but she knows his sorrow, the garden told her. In the way the pine tree trembled when no wind moved. In the way the bamboo shoots grew bent, always leaning away from the wall. In the cracked ceramic basin where no water flowed. The garden carries pain, but it also holds peace. Asa's task is simple: tend to it. She rakes, gently, never in straight lines, only in waves. She trims the moss with shears older than her own name. She replaces fallen cherry blossoms with fresh stones, pale pink and round like pearls. And sometimes she whispers. Small things. A verse from a half-forgotten haiku. The name of a flower no longer planted. A lullaby her mother sang before falling silent in the fire that claimed their home. The garden listens. It always does. And today, on this quiet spring morning, Asa finds something strange. Beneath the pine tree, half buried in moss, is a folded scrap of parchment. No seal, no stamp. Just a single word written in charcoal. Suki, moon. She does not touch it, only bows, and the garden breathes in around her, silent, still but watching. The bell from the main temple rings once in the distance. Asa closes her eyes. The parchment trembles, then disappears beneath the moss as if it had never been. But she will remember. Just as the stones remember. Just as the garden beneath the shogun's wall has always remembered. And above, unseen, the shogun stands at the far window of his chambers, eyes closed, listening. To a name no longer spoken aloud. And to the hush that holds it gently in the earth below. The morning after the parchment appeared, Asa arrived earlier than usual. The sky was still dark. Only a faint blush of indigo touched the horizon, and the bells in the temple had not yet begun their low, measured chant. She moved silently through the tea house, her sandals brushing the polished wood floor, past the cracked panel, into the hush, and the garden exhaled. The gravel lines from yesterday had held perfectly. No leaf disturbed them, no breeze scattered them. Asa paused, bowing low to the old pine tree. The moss was soft under her knees. But where the parchment had once been, there was only green. She brushed her fingers over the place gently, not to disturb, but to feel. The moss pulsed slightly with warmth, unusual, not wrong, just alive. Asa looked to the sky. The moon was gone, only a sliver remained, vanishing behind the high roof tiles of the wall above. She whispered the word again, Suki. The moss shifted. Not crumbling, not retreating, opening. Beneath the green lay something flat and smooth. She brushed more carefully this time until her fingers met stone. A tile, no larger than her palm, carved from pale granite. It bore a faint mark, a crescent enclosed in a fan, old, elegant, a symbol from an earlier age, an imperial crest. But not one she recognized from temple records. She did not lift it, only bowed again. The garden was speaking, not loudly, but through touch, through rhythm, through things placed not by hand, but by memory. Asa rose slowly. Raking would wait. She crossed to the far corner of the garden where the gravel met the curved stone path, and the stone lantern leaned just slightly inward. There, nestled beneath a bush of dwarf camellia, something else waited. A feather, pure white. Almost certainly from a heron, though how it arrived here, she could not say. No birds ever landed in this garden. Asa picked it up, holding it between two fingers. The breeze stirred, just once, as if approving. She tucked the feather into the fold of her sash and turned to the pond. Still empty, still dry, but something flickered in its basin. Not water, light, soft and blue, faint as a reflection with no source. And when Asa stepped closer, she saw not her face, but another's, a woman, dressed in older robes patterned with cranes and branches, the style long forgotten. Eyes closed, mouth slightly open as if whispering. The image flickered again and was gone. Only gravel remained. Only sky above, and Asa's heart thudded in her chest, not from fear. From knowing, the garden was remembering through her. That night, she returned to her sleeping mat within the servants' hall, far from the high windows of the palace. She placed the heron feather beneath her pillow and dreamed of raked lines turning into waves, of moonlight woven into branches, of a voice calling her name, not from above, but from beneath the moss. The next morning came with a hush thicker than usual. Even the sparrows in the temple eaves seemed quieter. The air had shifted cooler, but not from wind. It was the kind of quiet that came before something important, the kind of stillness that gardens remember. Asa stepped through the panel and bowed lower than usual. The garden welcomed her, but not with warmth, with awareness. She felt it like a soft hand on her shoulder, like the pause between breaths. The rake waited beside the gate. She lifted it. Usually she moved in long, flowing strokes, waves, and wind patterns, but today her hands chose circles. Circles within circles, some small like the ripple of a koi tail, others wide, echoing the moon itself. The gravel caught the pattern easily, almost as if it had been waiting for this shape to return. She moved without thought. The rhythm was natural. The rake hummed against the earth, not loud, but present. Each curve felt like a word she didn't yet understand, until suddenly her rake caught, snagged on something solid just beneath the gravel. She stopped. Kneeling down, she brushed away the top layer with her fingers. A smooth lacquered surface peeked through dark wood, old but well-preserved. A box, small, square, no larger than a folded fan. She hesitated. The garden was silent, watching. Then she lifted it. It was surprisingly light. On the lid, a single engraved kanji, Yoru, night. The moment her fingers traced the character, the pine tree behind her gave a low creak. Like old bones shifting, Asa turned the box gently in her hands. No lock, no seal. Inside soft silk, blue as twilight, and within the folds of silk, a second feather, this one deep gray, heron again, but tipped in pale gold. She lifted it, and beneath the silk found a torn slip of parchment. No words this time, just a painted symbol. A circle, broken up atop, a moon with an open mouth. She felt a breath escape her lips. Not hers. The garden's, It had exhaled, just once. And somewhere within her chest, the sound returned like a memory of wind brushing a curtain, soft, thin, impossible to keep. Asa placed the box back where it had been, covering it gently with gravel. But she did not rake over it. She left the shaped circle broken at the top etched into the stones. She rose slowly, and when she turned toward the exit, a shadow stood by the cracked panel, not threatening, still as the lanterns. An older man in a servant's robe, holding a folded scroll. She bowed, deep. The man did not speak, only held the scroll toward her, and with a slight incline of his head, passed her by and disappeared behind the tea house wall. Asa opened the scroll carefully. Inside, written in brush and ink, "The garden remembers what the court forgets. Meet me when the second crescent wanes." It was unsigned. No seal, but the ink smelled of sandalwood, rare, expensive, and familiar. She looked once more at the raked circle, the broken moon, and from the moss behind the pine tree, a silver thread of mist curled upward like breath. Asa held the scroll in both hands long after the figure had vanished behind the tea house. The words lingered like the last chime of a bell, soft but impossible to ignore. The second crescent, that would be 4 nights from now. She whispered the phrase once beneath her breath, and the wind moved, only slightly, but enough to stir the tiny bell that hung from the lowest branch of the pine. It wasn't there yesterday, she was certain of it. A miniature bell made of cracked bronze, no larger than a plum blossom. Its rope was frayed, its sound was barely more than a sigh. But it had rung an answer. She stepped toward it slowly, as if not to startle it. Around her, the garden felt closer, like a room that had drawn its walls in to listen. The bell trembled again. And then a voice. Not spoken aloud, but within. Like a thread pulled gently through her thoughts. Not words she understood, but feelings a memory brushed across her mind. A woman's hand gently wrapping a silk ribbon around a scroll. A name written, then washed away with tears. The sound of bamboo tapping in rhythm once, twice, pause again. Asa gasped softly. The bells stilled, and the pine tree behind it rustled, though no wind moved the air. She turned. One of the lowest branches had shifted, no longer bent forward, but curved sideways toward the north end of the garden, toward the wall. No path led there. Just a dense growth of ornamental bamboo, planted long ago to soften the edge of stone. She approached. The stalks had once grown straight, but now they arched, forming a low tunnel she had never seen before. Or never noticed. It felt like stepping into breath itself, soft air, filtered light, the scent of old rain. Her sandals moved silently across moss and ancient stone. The tunnel narrowed, until it opened into a space she hadn't known existed. Not a chamber, not a clearing, just a hollow, an absence. And in its center, a single water basin, stone-carved, dry, but etched on its side, barely visible beneath the moss. Suki, moon, again, the same word as the parchment, but older. Worn by time. She knelt before it, brushing the edge with her sleeve. No sound, no light, but she felt the echo of hands that once filled it. Women's hands, slender, steady. She imagined them pouring water from copper kettles, petals floating in the bowl. Moonlight reflected there. A ceremony, no longer practiced, yet not forgotten, not here. A sharp crack interrupted her thoughts. She turned. A single bamboo stalk had snapped clean and half cut from the inside, as if something had passed through, and on the ground where it lay, another feather. This one was black, slick and clean, like ink on fresh parchment. She did not pick it up. She only bowed, and whispered softly, "I see you." The feather trembled once, then settled. Behind her, the bell on the pine tree rang again. Once, then silence. But it was a full silence, a silence waiting to speak. That night, Asa did not sleep, not fully. She lay on her mat with her eyes open, listening to the silence between the wind. She imagined the dry water basin, the broken bamboo, the voice from the bell, not spoken, but breathed. And she imagined the petals that once floated in water now long gone. Her thoughts curled in slow spirals, like the rake's path across gravel. And when dawn touched the sky with its first soft gray, Asa rose before the morning bell. She tied her robe carefully, tucking yesterday's black feather into the inner lining, not as a keepsake, as a sign. The garden had begun to speak, and now she must learn how to listen. When she stepped inside, it felt different, not just awake, but watchful, as if the trees and stones had drawn closer in the night, curious about what she might do next. The bell beneath the pine tree was gone. In its place hung the strip of white cloth, no wider than 2 fingers. It fluttered gently, even though the air was still, a shide paper used in Shinto shrines. Torn at the ends, old, Asa bowed to it. Then she returned to the hollow path between the bamboo. It welcomed her again, the arch of stalks bowed lower now, more curved, as though shaped by her very presence. The water basin waited, the kanji for Suki gleaming faintly where moss had receded. This time, she brought water, a single gourd from the temple spring. She poured it slowly into the basin, clear, still, and in the reflection, the same face as before. The woman in crane-patterned robes. But this time her eyes were open, looking up, at Asa, not smiling, but knowing. And in her hands resting gently in her lap were petals, 5 of them, pale plum, curled at the edges. She raised one slowly and placed it on the water's surface. And then Asa's own water rippled. She gasped, not from fear, from recognition. The petals she had seen in her dream, not cherry, not camellia, but plum blossom, the Shogun's emblem in a time long past. She touched the basin gently, and this time a memory rose. Not hers, the garden's, a day centuries old, a woman kneeling here, whispering into the bowl, placing petals one by one, calling someone home, the name lost in time, but not in feeling. Asa's hands moved without thought. She reached into her sash and drew forth the black feather, lowered it onto the water. It floated for a moment, then slowly sank, and in its place a petal rose, new, alive. The basin shimmered once, then fell still. But the space around Asa had changed, not in sound, not in shape, but in purpose. The garden was no longer simply being kept. It was keeping her. And somewhere beyond the garden walls, a second bell rang, low, distant, but clear. The sound of the second bell lingered longer than it should have. Asa stood very still by the basin. No temple bell ever rang at this hour. And no bell in the Shogun's residence had been used in years, not since the time before she was born. But this tone was unmistakable, lower than the one by the pine, older, a single breath held in brass, and then silence. Not just quiet, expectant silence, the kind that wraps around you like a warm kimono in the cold. Asa bowed once to the basin, then stepped carefully back through the bamboo corridor. The arch felt narrower now, more precise, as if the stalks knew where she was meant to go. At the garden's edge, a white envelope rested on the edge of the stepping stones. She blinked. There had been nothing there when she passed minutes ago. She picked it up gently. There was no wax seal, only a folded flap. Inside, a simple card. Handwritten with calligraphy so fine it looked painted. The garden's memory is yours to tend. When the crescent vanishes, the wall will open. No name, no mark. But on the back of the card, pressed faintly into the paper, was a pressed plum blossom. Dried, faded, but still whole. Asa slipped the card into her sleeve and looked up toward the wall. The old stone rose high above, lined with ivy and shadow. There had never been an entrance, no door, no gate. Just history layered in stone, but now she began to feel it. Not in her eyes, in her bones. The way the air changed when something unseen moved behind it. The way the gravel felt under her feet softer, warmer, as if guiding her step. She returned to the pine and raked in wide curves today. Wide arcs that met in the center and spiraled outward like the ripples of a bell chime. The shapes flowed easily. They had been waiting for this rhythm. And by the time she finished, the garden had quieted again, completely. Even the birds did not sing. She knelt by the pine tree, hands folded, eyes closed, and listened. Not with her ears, but with trust, and she heard it again. The low bell, distant still, but closer now. As if the wall itself had leaned toward her, she opened her eyes slowly. On the base of the pine tree, someone had placed a small lacquered cup. She had not heard them come. She had not seen them leave. Inside the cup, a single plum blossom, floating, and the water it floated in was warm. She touched it gently, and in her mind, she heard a voice like wind passing through bamboo leaves. When the wall opens, you will remember what never was, and what always is. Her hand did not tremble. She simply bowed, and the garden, still as always, seemed to bow back. That night, sleep drifted around Asa like fog, not fully settling, not fully leaving. She dreamed of stone that moved like water, of blossoms whispering names she'd never spoken, and of bells that didn't ring with sound, but with light. When morning came, she found herself already sitting upright on her mat, hands folded as if in prayer. But she had not prayed. She had been listening. The message on the card echoed in her mind. When the crescent vanishes, the wall will open. She glanced at the sky from her window slit. The moon was nearly gone. One final crescent remained, perhaps 2 more nights, and then something. She rose slowly and prepared the tea tray not with the usual speed of her temple duties, but with care, with reverence. The jasmine she steeped that morning seemed to bloom louder. The steam rose in perfect spirals, and when she stepped through the panel into the garden, it was waiting, not expectantly, but ready, as if the garden had always known this day would come. She paused before the pine tree and offered a bow, this time holding the lacquered teacup she had found yesterday. She placed it at the base of the tree. The blossom still floated inside, untouched, unwilted. The air shimmered briefly, like a sigh of approval. She crossed the gravel slowly, rake in hand, but today she did not rake. The ground beneath her felt too sacred, as though any mark would disturb a pattern already laid. So she walked instead toward the wall's base. There, where moss clung tightly to the lowest stones, a narrow groove had appeared, thin, almost hidden. But it hadn't been there yesterday. She knelt, ran her fingers along the groove. It was not erosion. It was intentional. The groove traced the shape of a crescent, moon-thin and elegant, cut deep into the stone. She leaned forward, pressing both palms to the cold surface, and felt it. A hum, low and steady, not through her ears, through her bones. As if the stone was not resisting her touch, but recognizing it. Above, the wind stirred the shied paper tied to the pine. It fluttered 3 times, then stilled. Asa sat back. Something was coming. She didn't know what, but she would be here. The garden would be here. Together, they would remember what had been kept, and what had waited. She returned to the pond basin, the place where the woman's reflection had once looked back. The surface was smooth again. Still, but when Asa gazed into it this time, her own face shimmered slightly, and behind her, the faint image of a door half open, in the wall she had just touched. She turned quickly. Nothing there, only ivy, only stone. But the garden was whispering now. She could feel it. Whispers in the gravel, the bamboo, the pine bark. And in those whispers, she heard the same word again, Suki, the moon. Always the moon. The morning passed with a hush so deep it made the birdsong seem distant, like a dream already fading. Asa remained close to the pine tree. She swept nothing, rearranged nothing. She simply sat, hands folded in her lap, and watched how the garden breathed without her. The wind moved differently today. It came not in gusts, but in soft waves, timed, rhythmic, brushing over bamboo leaves like fingertips across strings. It was a pattern. She closed her eyes and counted. 1, 2, pause. 3, a stillness. And then 1 again. It repeated, not random, but measured. The same as the bamboo tapping in her memory. A language. One she couldn't yet understand, but one her body felt drawn to. She rose and followed the wind's rhythm to the base of the wall again. The groove, shaped like a crescent, had deepened slightly overnight. Not wide enough for fingers, but wider. The ivy above it had pulled back, not torn, but parted. Asa reached out and touched the revealed stone. There, etched faintly above the groove, was a symbol. A plum blossom enclosed in a ring of cranes. It wasn't the Shogun's crest. It was older. Something she had seen once before on an ancient scroll tucked in the corner of a temple archive. Too fragile to be touched, its text faded almost to nothing. It had been part of a forgotten family line. One vanished before records began. Whispers said they were once healers, gardeners. Whispers said they vanished. Asa traced the symbol with the tip of her finger. The stone beneath was warm, and beneath that warmth, she heard again the bell, faint, not distant, but beneath. A bell ringing from inside the wall, as if a hollow passage had stirred. She knelt again, pressing her ear to the stone, and what she heard was breath. A single inhale, long, steady, and then a woman's voice. Not aloud, but inside her. A voice smooth as silk and quiet as old snow. When the blossom falls on no season, the gate shall lift. Asa opened her eyes. She turned toward the pine. Its branches remained still, but on the gravel at its base, one single petal had fallen. Not from any tree nearby. It was plum. Soft pink, curled, unblemished. She picked it up and carried it carefully to the groove, laid it inside the crescent. The wind stilled. The garden held its breath, and slowly, a crack formed, not loud, not sudden, but slow and precise, like a seam splitting through memory. The wall had begun to open. Just a fraction, but enough to see darkness beyond, not emptiness. A space, waiting. Asa did not flinch when the wall shifted. It moved like a memory, soft, reluctant, slow. No great noise, no creaking of stone. Just the sound of moss parting and air escaping from a place long sealed. The crescent groove widened, barely a hand's width, and a sliver of darkness opened beyond it. It did not feel cold. It felt held, like a room that had waited generations for a door to open. Asa knelt before the entrance and bowed, her palms pressed to the gravel. Then she rose. No footsteps echoed as she crossed into the passage, only the sound of cloth brushing stone. The air inside was rich with the scent of pressed blossoms, old wood, and faint incense, though no fire had burned here in centuries. The walls were smooth, not carved like the palace above, but layered with lacquered wood, aged into amber. She touched it lightly, and her fingers came away with the scent of plum. The path narrowed after a dozen steps, bending gently to the left, and there, waiting on a low wooden platform, was a lantern. Not lit, but not extinguished either. A pale flame hovered inside it, flickering without fuel, without wick. Asa cupped her hand around it. The flame bowed to her palm and grew a little brighter. She lifted the lantern, and the path revealed itself further, a slope downward, into the belly of the wall. No words were carved, but the air carried meaning. She could feel the quiet weight of generations in the beams above her. And as she stepped further in, small alcoves appeared, each held a single object. A fan made of silk and bone, a pair of chopsticks tied with plum twine, a paper crane sealed in lacquer. These were offerings not from worshippers, but from keepers. Memories placed here, one by one, like beads on a string. At the 10th alcove, she stopped. A scroll rested there, untied, unfurled slightly at the corner. She knelt and reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the paper, a whisper stirred. Not words, names. Not said aloud, but felt. Each name came like the brush of wind over water, not spoken, not written, but known. Names that once belonged to those who tended the garden before her. Generations of silent hands, eyes that read the gravel's pattern like poetry, hearts that held secrets between stones and blossoms. And among them, one name pulsed stronger than the rest. It was not Asa's, and yet it felt like hers. She lifted the scroll, and inside, delicately inked, the keeper of what was not written. No instructions, no map, just a line of quiet understanding. And at the end of the passage, a wooden door, unmarked, but warm beneath her fingertips. She exhaled, pressed both palms to the wood, and waited. The flame inside the lantern steadied, and behind the door, a garden began to stir. The wooden door opened not with a creak, but with a breath. Asa felt it rise against her hands, a gentle resistance, then release, like a sigh that had waited centuries to be exhaled. What lay beyond was not darkness, it was dimness. A garden lit by a quiet silvery glow, not from moonlight, from something else. Asa stepped forward slowly, and the lantern flame in her hand flared once, then stilled, as if offering its light in reverence. She stood at the edge of a round clearing surrounded by tall, curved walls of stone covered in vines so fine they looked like threads of silk. In the center, a pond, still, but unlike any pond she had seen. Its surface reflected nothing, not the ceiling, not her face, not the lantern in her hand. It was deep, too deep to guess, and the water shimmered faintly, not with light, but with memory. Ripples stirred, though no stone had fallen, no breeze passed. The garden whispered not with words, but with return. She knelt beside the pond, placing the lantern on a smooth, flat stone. The flame bowed once more, then disappeared. And in the silence that followed, Asa dipped her fingers into the water, cool, but not cold. It felt like touching thought. The ripples spread outward, and for a moment, across the pond's surface, she saw a flicker. A young woman, kneeling just as she was now. Her robes older, her hair arranged in the fashion of a bygone era. She was placing a fan into the water and whispering something, but Asa couldn't hear it, only feel it. The same feeling from before. A message passed not through sound, but presence. She looked down at her own hands, empty, and yet her fingers ached to offer something. She reached into her robe and found what she had not remembered placing there, a folded piece of silk. Inside it, the pressed plum blossom from the envelope, whole, uncrushed. She opened the silk and let the blossom fall gently onto the surface. It floated, then turned, once, twice, and slowly began to sink. But as it did, the water shimmered again, and this time the reflection was not hers. It was theirs, dozens of faces, silent, watching, not haunting, guarding, gardeners through the ages, keepers of silence, tenders of the wall. And behind them, the curved shadows of the wall's interior began to pulse faintly. Lines traced into the stone slowly illuminating, crescents, plum blossoms, feathers, fans, and one final shape, a garden, mirrored beneath the one above, hidden, but always there. Waiting for someone to see it, Asa stood and bowed low. She did not speak. There was no need. The silence here was complete, not empty, full. And in its fullness, she heard once more that voice in the back of her heart. You are the first to return, but not the last. The water stilled. The pond returned to its silence, and in the very center of the clearing, beneath a curtain of soft moss, a stone began to rise, just slightly, enough to be seen, enough to be touched. A stone with her name, not carved, not chiseled, but grown, softly, like a memory becoming real. Asa knelt before the rising stone. Its surface was smooth, moss-flecked, and warm, just slightly warmer than the cool breath of the underground garden. And there, at its center, her name. Not painted, not etched, but formed in the stone itself, as if time had pressed it into shape long before she arrived. She reached out, fingers trembling not from fear, but awe. The moment her skin met the stone, a pulse moved through it. Not a sound, a sensation, like water finding its level. Asa closed her eyes, and the garden rose up to meet her in silence. Images bloomed behind her lids, soft and slow, like petals unfolding at dusk. She saw a young woman standing beneath a rain curtain, her sleeves soaked but her eyes clear. She saw an old man teaching a child to rake gravel, each stroke a lesson in humility. She saw a scroll, sealed and buried at the foot of a pine tree, then unearthed generations later. And she saw herself, standing in this very garden, but dressed in robes she had never worn, hair braided in a style older than her memory, and beside her, the woman from the reflections. They did not speak, but they bowed to each other in unison, a gesture not of greeting, but of recognition. The pulse in the stone faded. Asa opened her eyes, and the garden remained still, yet deeply present. She understood now. She had not been chosen by the garden. She had remembered it, just as it had remembered her. A guardian returning to the place that had always known her name. The moss around the stone shifted slightly, revealing another mark barely there, a feather. Not drawn, not laid, but grown from the mineral itself, gray and silver, like the Huron's feather from days ago. She smiled softly, then bowed again. And when she rose, the light in the garden had changed. A faint shimmer now lit the walls, not sunlight, but something more delicate. The pulse of memory, the life of those who had tended the garden in silence and care. A whisper of every hand that had swept a path, tended a blossom, or buried a promise in earth. She walked once more to the pond and looked down. This time she saw her reflection clearly. And in it she saw not only herself, but the line behind her. Dozens, hundreds, silent, smiling. And as the water settled, one final ripple passed through it. From its center, a single plum blossom rose, unafraid of time, unafraid of loss. It floated to the edge, as if returning to her. Asa reached out, kept it gently in her hand, and held it close to her chest. A symbol, a welcome, a vow. She would tend this garden, not as its owner, but as its voice. Asa lingered at the pond's edge, the plum blossom resting quietly in her palm. Its weight was so light she almost questioned if it was truly there, yet it warmed her hand as if it pulsed with memory. She tucked it gently inside her robe over her heart. The stillness around her was perfect. No wind, no birds, no footsteps, only the low hush of presence, and then a sound. Not startling, not sudden. A rustle like silk sleeves brushing past reeds. She turned. In the far corner of the underground garden, the vines that clung to the stone walls had parted. A narrow archway had appeared. Wooden beams shaped its entrance, wrapped in threads of red cloth, faded and fraying. Asa stepped toward it, lantern in hand. Though it had extinguished before, the flame flickered to life again, no spark, no strike. It simply awakened. She entered the arch and found a narrow corridor sloping upward. The wood here was older, the air drier. But in that dryness lingered the faintest perfume-like pages of an old book that had once been closed with flowers pressed inside. The passage twisted gently, like a path walked often but never rushed. Halfway through, a paper tag hung from the ceiling beam. A prayer slip, unfaded, written in a hand almost identical to Essa's. She paused beneath it and read aloud. What is remembered need not be spoken to survive. She touched it softly. The paper swayed, then stilled. At the end of the corridor, a door waited wider than the last, rounded at the top like the gateway to a sacred grove. When Asa opened it, the world beyond surprised her. She was in the same garden, but not. Above ground now, in the upper court, where no one had tended for decades. Cherry trees grew untamed, their branches long and wild. Moss covered what had once been gravel paths. And in the very center, a cracked stone pedestal. Upon it, a broken lantern, the twin of the one she carried. She walked toward it slowly, placed her lit lantern beside its broken twin, and knelt. The flame in her lantern flickered, then leapt, and gently, quietly, passed into the broken one. It relit, softly, steadily, a memory restored. Asa sat beside the twin flames and let her eyes close. She felt the garden breathe in around her. And in that breath, she heard voices, dozens, hundreds, not loud, not urgent, just present. Like petals drifting in air, caught in no rush, falling only when ready. She whispered to them, I remember you. And in return, the wind stirred the wild cherry branches above her, not violently, but like a nod, like gratitude. Asa remained kneeling between the two lanterns, one old, one newly lit. The glow they shared was quiet and constant, neither flame outshining the other, but blending like soft voices in a song remembered only by heart. Above her, the overgrown cherry branches creaked gently in the morning hush. A single petal dropped, then another, though it was not the season for blossoms. She watched them land between her knees, their color pale, their edges curled with time. A breeze passed through the upper garden, but it did not chill. It invited. She looked around. Where once there were pathways, now there were only traces stones displaced by root and vine, steps softened by years of forgetful weather, but her feet remembered. Not in thought, but in instinct. She followed a curved arc that led to the far edge of the courtyard. There, an old writing desk leaned under a canopy of ivy. Its surface was weathered, its legs half buried, but beside it sat a single, intact box, lacquered, closed, no dust. Asa knelt before it, slid the lid open. Inside, hundreds of tiny scrolls, none thicker than a finger. She picked one at random and slowly unraveled the silk binding. Inside a letter, not to her, to the garden. Written in a graceful hand, the ink faded but readable. I dreamed again of the white heron. It carried my sorrow and dropped it beneath the pine. If the wind replies tomorrow, I will wait by the second bell. No signature, no date. She opened another, then a third. Each scroll contained a voice, a whisper, a hope sealed not for return but for rest. Letters never meant to be answered, only received. And the garden had kept them. She looked around at the vines curling upward, at the cherry trees leaning toward the stone basin, and then at the lantern still flickering side by side. She realized this place had not been abandoned and had been listening for generations, holding each sorrow, each wish, each quiet offering with the patience of earth and root. Asa reached into her sleeve and drew out her own parchment, blank. She had brought it unknowingly, but her hands now knew what to do. She dipped her brush into the inkstone resting near the desk, still damp, still fragrant, and she wrote, I came through the wall, through silence, through shadow. The garden heard me before I ever spoke. I remember what it forgot to forget. She rolled the scroll, tied it with a strand of her hair, and placed it gently into the box. The wind rose. Only slightly, enough to stir the cherry petals around her. Asa closed the lid, and in the distance, the second bell rang. Just once, low, gentle, whole. The bell's chime rolled through the upper garden like a breath drawn slowly, then released into stillness. It came not from above, but from somewhere near, nearer than it had ever sounded before. Asa stood slowly, brushing dried cherry petals from her sleeves. She left the scroll box unopened, resting beneath the ivy, where it would continue keeping what others had once given. The lanterns behind her flickered once in tandem, then settled into a steady glow. She did not extinguish them. Some flames are not meant to be put out. Instead, she followed the faint memory of a path, a gravel line long since softened by moss, winding toward the rear wall of the courtyard. And there she found it, a weathered post of red cedar, leaning slightly with age, and atop it, the second bell. Cracked, tarnished, but intact. Its surface bore the same plum blossom crest as the stone in the hidden garden, but this one had been etched deeper cut by hand, deliberate, a memory no storm could wear away. Asa stood before it in silence. No rope hung from its heart, no striker nearby, and yet it had rung. Not to summon, not to warn, but to welcome. She reached out and placed her palm against the bell's base. It was cool to the touch, but as her skin warmed it, a vibration answered not from the metal, but from the earth below. A tremble so soft it could only be felt, not heard, and then a whisper, not in her ear, in her chest. The second garden was not built. It was remembered. Asa closed her eyes and let the whisper expand. It wrapped around her like a silk shawl. She saw people walking beneath the bell centuries ago, gardeners, messengers, children carrying cups of spring water, monks laying incense at its base, and then one alone, a young woman, hair braided in the old style. Robes like Asa's, she bowed before the bell, touched it once, and turned toward a gate long since sealed. Asa's eyes opened. The ground beneath the bell had shifted, just slightly. A circle of gravel, previously covered by vine, had parted. In the center, a stone slab round, uncarved. Except now, a faint symbol appeared beneath her feet, a heron in flight, the same that had guided her dream. She knelt, brushed the gravel back with her hands. The stone beneath bore concentric rings like the ripples of a basin's surface. At their center, a keyhole. No key lay nearby. But Asa didn't need one. She reached into her robe and drew forth the feather. Not black, not silver, but something between. Its shaft was smooth and warm. She placed its tip into the center of the rings, and the stone shifted once, twice, then slowly turned. A soft click echoed, and the earth whispered, "Welcome home." As the stone circle turned, a seam appeared beneath Asa's knees, subtle at first, like the quiet line where night turns to dawn. Then, with a soft exhale of earth and time, the center of the ring began to rise, only slightly, just enough for a light to slip through the edges. It wasn't sunlight, nor lantern glow. It was garden light, that peculiar shimmer that exists only where memory and peace overlap. Asa rose slowly, the feather still in her hand. The stone rose with her breath, and beneath it, hidden for generations, lay a spiral staircase carved directly into the soil. The steps were moss-lined and edged in plum-colored stone, polished by nothing but patience. No scent of mold, no chill of deep places. Only the familiar perfume of jasmine, pine bark, and river mist. She stepped onto the first stair, then another. Each one hummed faintly under her feet, not sound, but memory. She descended slowly. As she moved downward, she noticed etchings along the wall, not words patterns. Raked gravel designs, spirals, waves, and fans, drawn in the language of silence. A rake had never touched these stones. They had been remembered into the wall. The final step brought her to a chamber round and open, with a ceiling high enough to vanish into shadow. And in its center, a tree, alive, growing, blossoming, not cherry, not plum, but something in between. Its blossoms shimmered white with hints of dusk, petals gently falling and never touching the floor. They vanished mid-air, like the end of a soft dream. The tree's roots coiled across the floor in elegant knots, like calligraphy written with intention. Asa stood before it in silence. She didn't know whether to kneel, to bow, to touch it. So she did what the garden had taught her. She listened. And in that stillness, the tree answered. The blossoms stirred in a breeze that didn't move her hair. A single petal floated down. This one did not vanish. It landed in her open palm, warm and fragrant. And in the moment she touched it, a vision bloomed behind her eyes. A woman older, now walking the same path Asa had, leaving the same lantern, placing the same feather, writing a final scroll, then vanishing into a wall that did not yet exist. Her name, not spoken. But Asa knew it, because it pulsed softly behind her own. A name carried forward not in blood, but in memory. She had come before, not in form, in essence. And now Asa stood not as a new gardener, but as the echo of the first. The blossom in Asa's palm glowed faintly now, not like fire, not like moonlight, but like warmth drawn from the soul of the tree itself. She held it to her heart, feeling a rhythm that wasn't hers but welcomed her, pulsing softly like a second heartbeat. The chamber around her remained silent, and yet it spoke in every falling petal and the gentle stretch of the tree's shadow across the stone. She noticed something then. Along the curved chamber wall, nestled between root and stone, were shelves. Tiny, seamless, grown directly from the wall itself, and upon each one bundles wrapped in silk, some crimson, some ash gray, some a deep indigo, soft and folded like sleeping birds. Each bundle bore a single emblem embroidered by hand, the heron, the plum, the rake, the bell. She stepped forward and touched one. The silk was smooth, but the air around it trembled ever so slightly. Not danger, not warning, respect. She did not open it. Instead, her eyes were drawn to a space where a shelf had begun to form, but no bundle rested yet, just the faint imprint of one, waiting for hers. She reached into her sleeve and drew out the scroll she had not realized she was still holding. It was blank when she placed it there, but now, as she unfurled it, ink traced itself slowly across the fiber's soft black lines blooming into form. When the rake is silent, the blossom knows. She blinked. That was not her writing, not exactly. But it was her voice. A voice passed down, reshaped through years of silence. She rolled the scroll gently, wrapped it in white silk, and placed it on the waiting shelf. The wall hummed softly, not like stone, like breath. Then the tree above her stirred again. Its roots moved, not far, but enough to reveal a hollow space in the floor beneath it. A space shaped like a hand resting in still water. At its center, a shallow bowl. Inside the bowl, water that shimmered like starlight. Asa knelt beside it. She cupped her hands and dipped them in. The water felt weightless. As she brought it to her face, she inhaled not through her nose, but through memory. And suddenly, she remembered everything, not as facts, not as history, but as presence. She remembered planting the first seed in this chamber centuries ago. She remembered bowing before the bell, before the gate was sealed. She remembered raking the first spiral into gravel and watching it vanish beneath the wind. And most of all, she remembered the silence, not as absence, but as language. The garden had never forgotten her, and now she would never forget it. Asa remained kneeling by the shimmering bowl, the weightless water drying without touch, leaving behind not moisture but clarity. Her breath came softer now, slower, as though time itself had decided to sit beside her and listen. Around her, the roots of the tree shifted once more, not with force, but reverence. A gentle parting, and in the newly revealed hollow, beneath a curtain of glowing moss, something ancient rested, a small wooden box, no larger than 2 hands, bound in woven cord. The cord was sealed with wax, and impressed into the wax, a symbol of the moon cradled by waves, not one she recognized, and yet it felt familiar. She reached toward the box, and the air shimmered faintly like heat above summer stone. The box was warm to the touch, its surface smooth but worn at the edges, as if held many times by the same careful hands. She broke the seal with the edge of her nail. The wax split soundlessly. Inside, wrapped in linen, lay a comb, carved from bone. Intricate, the teeth of it shaped like petals, and etched between them a poem. Only 5 words: return when the moon listens. Asa turned the comb in her hand, and for a moment the chamber darkened, not with fear, but with focus. And in the quiet that followed, the lantern inside her memory flared again. She saw herself beneath the Shogun's balcony, a child not yet old enough to rake the gravel properly, watching her grandmother speak to a pine tree as if it were an elder. She had not remembered that moment until now, and yet it returned fully formed. And her grandmother's hand that day had been this comb. She had worn it in her hair, tucked like a crown just above her left ear. Asa touched the same spot on her own head and found, with wonder, the soft imprint where the cone now rested. She had not placed it there, but it belonged. And with it, something shifted. A breeze moved across the chamber floor slow and low, almost crawling like mist. It spiraled around Asa, picking up the fallen petals that had not vanished. They rose in a soft dance, circling her once, twice, and then settled into the shallow bowl of starlight water, where they dissolved, one by one. As they disappeared, the tree's blossoms stilled. No more fell. No more shimmered. It was complete. Asa looked up into the branches above, and for the first time she saw it, a single fruit, round and pale gold, pulsing gently with inner light, not ripe, not yet, but waiting. The pale golden fruit glowed faintly in the hush above her. It did not shimmer like the blossoms. It did not fall. It simply was, suspended among the highest limbs of the memory tree. Asa gazed up, hands folded gently in her lap. She did not move to reach for it. She understood it was not meant to be taken. It was meant to be invited. The chamber around her felt different now. Not fuller, but clearer, like fog lifting from a quiet pond, revealing stones beneath that had always been there. The roots of the tree settled once more, coiling into stillness like resting dragons. And as they did, a soft warmth gathered at her feet. She looked down. A circle of moss had begun to glow, faint and green, lit from within like lantern light trapped beneath the soil. She placed her palms onto it, fingers splayed. The warmth met her gently, no heat, no burn, just recognition. And then a sound, not a bell, not wind, but a single note. Deep and round, like the beginning of a song no one remembered how to finish. It vibrated through the moss, up through her arms, into her chest, and from there into the space above. The golden fruit pulsed once, and a petal broke loose. Not from the tree, but from the fruit itself. It drifted down like a slow exhale. Asa cupped her hands. The petal landed silently in her palms. It was not soft. It was not fragile. It was smooth and cool, like porcelain carved from memory itself. And on its surface, a map, not of roads or rivers, but of seasons, drawn as spirals, circles, waves, marked with symbols only the garden could translate. Asa ran her thumb over the lines, and in that moment she saw everything the tree had ever witnessed. A snowfall remembered by no scroll, a storm that had carved new meaning into gravel, the first gardener laying a single stone in the wrong place, only to find it was the right one all along. Its season the garden had kept. Not just events but feelings. The joy of a morning bell. The sorrow of an uneaten offering. The silence of an apology whispered too late. She looked again at the tree, and the fruit above it dimmed slightly satisfied, perhaps, that the offering had been received. Asa pressed the petal map to her chest, just over her heart. It vanished. Not disappeared, absorbed, and she felt it settle inside her like a seed. No weight, just promise. The kind of promise you don't say aloud, only grow. The golden fruit did not fall. It no longer needed to. Its purpose had passed like the hush after a poem. Asa remained kneeling on the moss circle, her breath as even as the garden's pulse, her hands resting gently in her lap. The petal map, now part of her, no longer glowed, but something inside her did. A direction, not forward, not back, but down. She rose and turned to the tree's roots again. One of them had curled outward slightly, revealing a new opening in the chamber floor narrow, just wide enough for a single body to pass. A tunnel lined not with stone or earth, but with sleeping stone. Each side of the passage hummed faintly, as if dreaming. Asa stepped forward. The moss beneath her feet thickened, padding her steps. She did not feel cold, nor fear, only a solemn quietness, like the space between words. The tunnel sloped gently downward. The air was still but rich earthy with hints of jasmine and pine, as though the upper garden still breathed softly through the roots. After a dozen steps, the walls began to change. They no longer hummed. They whispered. Faint words, layered over one another like echoes in slow motion. Not in her language, but in feeling. Asa reached out and placed her hand against the wall, and the stone beneath her fingers rippled, once, and suddenly she understood. These were stones that held the dreams of gardeners past. Not memories, wishes, unspoken, ungranted, but never gone. A woman who had hoped the moss would grow over the gravel exactly so. A monk who had buried a bowel and forgotten why. A boy who had once told the pond a secret and waited for it to ripple back. All of it still here. Asa continued, hand brushing gently across the wall as she walked. Each stone she touched pulsed faintly soft as breath, until at last the tunnel opened into a final chamber. No tree, no lantern. Just a single stone bed, carved from the same sleeping rock, covered in silk the color of evening clouds. And upon the bed, a mirror, round, polished, unblemished. Asa stepped toward it. In the mirror, she expected to see herself. But she didn't. She saw the garden, not as it was now, as it had been, as it could become. She saw raked paths reborn, cherry branches gently pruned, bells polished and hung anew. She saw someone not her, but carrying her eyes walking those paths, tending the blossoms, listening to the silence, a future, not hers alone. She knelt before the mirror, the petal map in her chest fluttering softly, and she whispered, "I am ready." The mirror pulsed once, and the silk around the stone bed shifted, inviting her to rest. Asa placed her hands on the silk-draped stone bed. It was smooth as still water, not cold, not warm, just present. She sat slowly, lowering herself with the reverence of a closing petal. When her back touched the silk, the chamber exhaled, not wind, not sound, just a feeling like walls that had been holding their breath for generations, and now they sighed. Above her, the mirror remained, no longer reflecting, just watching. And in its polished surface, a soft pulse now glowed. The same rhythm that had echoed through the petal map, the same breath the garden had drawn since long before her name was known. Asa closed her eyes, and the silence welcomed her. It was not sleep that came, but stillness. Deep and soft, like lying in the palm of a mountain. The kind of stillness that grows moss on stone and softens even the sharpest memory. In that stillness, she dreamed. But not of people or places. She dreamed of care. Of slow hands folding soil around roots. Of laughter shared over tea in cracked cups. Of quiet offerings placed on weathered altars, no prayers spoken, yet all heard. She dreamed of gardens that stretched far beyond stone walls. of bridges arched over ponds that remembered every moonrise, of wind chimes made from broken cups, singing songs only the herons understood. And in her dream, she felt the garden wrap around her, not as walls, but as presence, soft, still, steady. When she opened her eyes, though she hadn't meant to, she wasn't in the chamber anymore. She was back in the upper garden, but something had changed. The gravel paths were cleared, the plum trees pruned and blooming. The second bell, shining softly, hummed a low, round note that echoed across the stones. And there, in the center of the court, stood the memory tree. Not underground, here, tall, whole, its blossoms drifted down in perfect silence. And tending it, not Asa, but someone else. A girl, young, her hair braided with tiny feathers, her robe the color of herons at dusk. She looked up, smiled, and bowed. Asa bowed in return, and as she rose, so did the garden. It did not vanish. It did not change. It simply was. Asa placed her hand over her heart, where the petal map still glowed faintly, and she whispered the words that had no beginning. When the rake is silent, the blossom knows. The garden beneath the Shogun's wall has gently closed its final gate. You are welcome to return whenever the moon listens.